Welcome to the English class. Today we are going to study the chapter Fire. Fire, Friend and Foe. First of all, let's see the history of fire. Only man was frightened of fire. He felt fire was powerful and dangerous. He watched lightning and volcanoes and got the idea of fire. So man was frightened of fire in the primitives. Earlier time, man was frightened of fire. Why? Because he felt it to be very dangerous and powerful. For instance, he must have burnt his finger when put into fire, or he must have seen the animals being killed due to fire, the damages caused in the forest by the fire. So he became very afraid of this fire. He was frightened to see fire. He just watched the lightnings in the sky, and he must have seen volcanoes eruption, and he got the idea of fire. Then he found that if I am able to create fire, of course it will be useful. We can become powerful. So maybe he liked fire, though he was afraid of fire, and he thought it to be powerful. In order to become powerful, he must have acquired the skill of how to create fire, how to make fire. Now let's see the definition of fire. Fire is the result of a chemical reaction. Oxygen in the air combines with carbon and hydrogen in the fuel. Energy is released in the form of heat and light. This is called fire. Fire is actually a result of chemical reaction. Oxygen in the air combines with carbon and hydrogen in the fuel. So hydrocarbons. The fuels are mostly hydrocarbons that we must have seen in chemistry and all. Hydrocarbons. Most of the fuels we can break up into carbon and hydrogen. They have got C6, H6 and so on and so forth formulas. So it will consist of carbon and hydrogen. So the carbon and hydrogen in the fuel is consumed by this fire. It mixes with oxygen, and as a result we get heat in the process, heat and light. This is called fire. So once again, let's understand what is fire. Fire is the result of a chemical reaction. So what is the chemical reaction? O2 plus C plus H. So these three elements, oxygen, carbon and hydrogen, react in the presence of air in the atmosphere, and as a resultant, energy is released in the form of heat and light. So this process, in the higher class you come to know is combustion. So this is called fire. So due to combustion, fire is caused or fire is produced. How to make fire? The same thing, that we know that three things are must or needed to make fire: fuel, oxygen and heat. These three things are needed to make fire. Fuel, as we saw just now, that it consists of carbon and hydrogen as element, hydrocarbons. Then the oxygen you get it from the air, and heat. It is the minimum temperature required to get it burned, to excite it, to get a spark. So these three things are needed to make a fire. Examples of fuel: wood, coal, cooking gas, petrol, and so on. So you must have seen most of the things that we can create or make fire by wood, coal, cooking gas, petrol. So these are some examples of fuel. Flash point. Every fuel has a particular temperature at which it begins to burn. This temperature is called the flash point or kindling temperature. You see, if you keep all these three, fuel and oxygen in there, it doesn't create fire. The fire is not caused by itself, because it requires a particular temperature to burn, and this temperature at which the fire is caused is called flash point or kindling temperature. So the heat is produced. Heat in the sense here, the flash point. So at particular flash point, the fuel combines with oxygen and it makes fire. Advantages of fire: to cook our food, warm our homes, generate electricity. So there are advantages and disadvantages both of fire. What are the advantages? We use fire to cook our food, to warm our homes during winter, and to generate electricity. The disadvantages of fire: if fire goes out of control, it can burn homes, shops, and forests. If gone out of control, burn homes and shops, forests, etc. So there are both advantages and disadvantages of fire. Advantages in cooking, then keeping ourselves warm and to generate electricity. Disadvantage: it can burn things like homes, shops, and forest. How to extinguish fire? A fire can be put out if one of the three things needed for burning is taken away. So you know the three things are essential or must to cause fire, and that is fuel, oxygen, and heat. So if we take away fuel, one of them, then we can't produce fire. So if we take out oxygen, or if we take out that particular flash point or heat, then fire can't be produced. We can't make fire. So this is one of the method also to go the reverse way, that is deprive it or just remove one of the things that is essential in making fire. So either remove fuel or oxygen or that particular heat, the temperature required, the flash point required, and there will be no fire as such. Second, by not allowing oxygen to reach the burning material. So as you know the thing that is called smothering. For example, smother with a damp blanket or sack. So put a blanket or the burning material or a sack. Even some people put bedding on that person who is burning or something like that, a thing that is burning. Put a sack or a blanket on that, and this was smothering, and deprive it of the oxygen. So when you suddenly put that blanket, that oxygen inside will go out and the thing will be extinguished. The fire will be extinguished. So put a damp blanket. Damp is wet. Wet blanket or a sack. The other method is using carbon dioxide. You know, when you put carbon dioxide, that is used in carbon dioxide extinguishers. So if you put carbon dioxide by some equipments, then you know that carbon dioxide reacts with oxygen. Ultimately, there will be no oxygen there, and the thing gets extinguished. Whatever the burning item or thing gets extinguished. The third method is by bringing the temperature below the flash point. Example, spraying water on fire. So if you put water on fire, the temperature comes down. So whatever the minimum required temperature that for burning, so it will be below that temperature or below that flash point. Ultimately, the fire will be extinguished. So that you can do by just spraying water on it. The water should not be used on fire caused by electrical appliances or by oil. However, if the fire is caused by electrical appliances and if you put water, you know what happens, that you get short circuited and maybe you also get shock, electric shock. Or if it's oil, if you put water, you know that water floats on oil and it will keep it burning. So in both the cases, if it is the fire caused due to electrical appliances or due to oil, you should not put water, but instead you can use a carbon dioxide extinguisher. Here carbon dioxide extinguisher can be used instead. So water should not be used on fires caused by electrical appliances or by oil. Here carbon dioxide extinguisher can be used instead. In the past, human chains were found and buckets of water were used to extinguish fire. So what they used to, they used to catch hands and remain in a line and used to pass bucket to each other's hand. Ultimately, the buckets of water reached there and used to extinguish the fire. So human chains were found and buckets of water passed from one to another. So in this way, if one person goes from one to last, it will take time. So these human chains were found to extinguish fire caused in buildings. But now, it's become traditional method, and nowadays we call fire brigade or trained firefighters with special equipments to extinguish fire. So nowadays, if we call this fire brigade, trained firefighters will come there with special equipments that they got hose pipe and all that stuff. The carbon is extinguisher and water spray at a faster speed. So new buildings nowadays must observe the fire prevention norms such as living space between buildings. Another thing is about that the government has made some prevention norms that the constructive agency has to follow. So if making a new building, then you must see that the fire prevention norms are put into control or executed. So fire prevention norms such as living space between building. If there are two buildings, then there should be space so that it doesn't catch fire. Otherwise, one building catching fire will spread that fire to the other building. So this should not happen there. So because of that, they have put some prevention norms just like a living space between buildings, and new constructive agencies have to follow these norms or they don't get license and all. Fire is still worshipped in many parts of the world. Fire is indeed a friend, but could be the worst enemy if it gets out of control. Fire is a good servant but a bad master. So lastly, we come to know that still today we find fire being worshipped in many parts of the world. So fire could be a friend as well as a enemy. It could be a dangerous enemy if it gets out of control. Fire could be a good servant but a bad master. So as well as we are able to control fire, it will be advantage, but if we are not able to control fire, it will be disadvantage. So happy learning. This one, watch the channel, subscribe to my channel to go through more videos of such kind.